If you look at the Leica SL range of mirrorless cameras on paper, a lot of people would argue that the specs don't necessarily warrant the price. In fact, the Leica SL2S that I just bought shares very similar specs to the Lumix S1 and in some ways is beaten by it. And the reality is that the Lumix S1 is less than half the price. So why did I buy the Leica SL2S? For those that have been living under a rock, Panasonic and Leica are practically tied at the hip. Leica is the creator of the L mount, and the SL lineup of cameras from Leica share a lot of the same tech as the S-series Panasonic cameras. This includes the IBIS system, the Contrast Detect AF system that both brands have now moved away from, amongst other things. Leica is also credited for certifying multiple Lumix lenses, most of which being the cream of the crop, like the S Pro lineup for example. As an avid Lumix user and a wannabe Leica hipster, I decided to bite the bullet and compare the experience between the two systems myself. I want to know whether there's actually magic within Leica's colour science, whether the build quality warrants the price tag, and ultimately whether Lumix cameras make for a better investment overall. I want to compare colour science, JPEG processing, low light capabilities, log formats, overall usability, and pretty much everything in between. And since no one else has really delved deeply into the overall similarities and differences between Leica and Lumix, I thought it might as well be me. So with that out of the way, let me tell you a little bit more about the SL2S in case you're not familiar with this camera. The Leica SL2S was announced in December 2020 and stands to be Leica's only true hybrid mirrorless body, at least in my opinion. I say this because of the imaging sensor, which is a 24 megapixel backside illuminated CMOS sensor, and before you say it's the exact same that we've seen inside the S1 or the S5, I actually don't think it is, or at least I can't find any evidence online that would suggest this. The SL2 features a higher resolution 47 megapixel full frame sensor, and the new SL3 has a 60 megapixel sensor. But for me, the limitations in low light are more deal breaking than resolution, so I personally wouldn't opt to use a higher resolution camera for video. Therefore, it made the most sense for me to get the Leica SL2S simply because I can do fairer comparisons with my Lumix bodies. But people don't buy Leica cameras for their specs, at least I don't think most of them do. People say there's something special about the way that Leica does colours and their overall colour science, so my plan is to figure out whether that's actually true. What I can already tell you after having the SL2S in hand for a few days is that the build quality is truly next level. It really does feel like a premium product in the hands with a super minimalistic design and can almost be cold to the touch thanks to the solid metal construction. The menus are laid out very nicely and every button on the body is customizable, so the overall shooting experience is actually really enjoyable. The EVF is big and bright, just like the ones we've seen on the S1 and the S1H, and I know I'll be using the EVF more with this camera than I do with the S5 series, but that's only because the SL2S's rear LCD is fixed. I'm really interested to see how Leica shapes up for both stills and video shooting, so both cams will be truly tested and compared in videos to come. For now though, I just wanted to share a few samples from the first week of owning my Leica and ultimately fill you in on what's to come. My plan is to make the Leica and Lumix comparisons as fair as I can, so the fact that I can already use all of my L mount lenses makes this a lot easier. It's also why I think Leica is such an interesting brand for me and for you guys, because ultimately it does serve to be a very practical upgrade path if you are already a Lumix L mount shooter. And even if after all of my testing I find out that there's really not too much of a difference in image quality, I can confirm that owning a camera with a red dot has already made me feel at least 20% cooler. And maybe that's all Leica is, a sought after brand name just like Rolex or Cartier for example. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because while I was doing my research before putting the trigger on this camera, I realized that Leica cameras hold their value very well on the used market. In fact, much better than Lumix do, Sony, Canon, everyone else basically. Therefore, the cost of ownership is actually considerably less than one might think, especially if you plan on selling it and upgrading as the tech improves. And I'm confident that I can get the same price as I paid for this camera when I come to sell it, and even if I do lose $500 or so after a year of ownership, that's still a pretty good deal for a Leica in my opinion. So if you're interested in seeing more from this camera, as well as seeing some comparisons alongside the Lumix bodies, and have ever been interested in Leica as a brand, then do make sure you are subscribed, stay tuned for some videos in the coming weeks, and let's do a deep dive on Leica once and for all.